Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm trying something different. This is a day in the life. It was about a week ago I woke up. It was raining really hard and thundering, which meant I didn't have to go outside and do my morning watering in the garden, which was a blessing. So started off the day with my coffee, and the night before I had dehydrated some peas, some frozen peas, and I just went to work emptying the trays into a bowl and then put them in a glass jar. I dehydrated them at 125 for 10 hours and just let them go overnight. It's recommended to check on them at least halfway through, but I did just let them go and they turned out really well.
Is it better to have loved and lost than to have you wander around my love?
I do live in a townhome, so space is pretty limited, but so far the shelving system in my dining room is working out really well to store my dehydrated food and dry goods. So this morning my son wanted eggs, my daughter wanted pancakes, and I wanted a smoothie. So pretty typical morning where I'm cooking several different things. My son loves eggs, but my daughter does not. Because I live in a townhome, I'm not able to have my own chickens. So I rely on the local farmers, and so far that's worked out really well.
Though you call me stuff this time, I'm not everything you swore me.
These are sourdough starter pancakes, which I absolutely love. The kids love them too. Very, very easy to make. So if you are into sourdough, or you're just starting out and you don't know what to do with the discard, pancakes is definitely the way to go. Very simple too. The recipe calls for 2 cups of sourdough starter, 2 eggs, 1/4 cup of coconut oil, 2 tablespoons of honey, half a teaspoon of salt, a teaspoon of baking soda. I did cut the recipe in half because it was just going to feed my daughter. I started using sourdough because I was having a hard time digesting wheat, and sourdough, because it's fermented, it alters the enzymes in the wheat and it counteracts the adverse reaction to gluten. So if you have gluten intolerance, I highly recommend learning more about how to cook with sourdough. Now that I've used about half of my sourdough starter, it's time to feed it so that I can make a loaf of bread later in the day or set it overnight. All I do is just kind of judge how much is left in the jar of starter, and I will double it. So it looked to me about 1 cup of starter, and I added a cup of flour and about a cup of warm room temperature water, filtered. Now I'm making my smoothie using kefir, which I made myself using kefir grains and organic milk. And I absolutely love it. It reminds me a lot of just yogurt, but it's a little tangier. And I add berries and some honey and sometimes collagen, and it's delicious. I was at the end of my kefir, which I used for this smoothie, so it's time to make some more. So you see me adding the grains and then filling up the jar with milk. When I first started, I had a tablespoon of kefir, and now you can see it grew so much. I'm able to make a whole half gallon at a time. Some of you may have seen my previous video showing me harvesting some of the herbs and veggies from my garden. So now it's just time to dehydrate them, and I thought I'd start with the sage and the rosemary. I just started learning about dehydrating, so I wasn't really sure how long to put the rosemary and sage in. Rosemary is very thick, and so is the sage. I did take the sage leaves off the stem. So I put them at 125 for, I think 3 hours, and that was definitely not enough. So I put them for another 5 hours, and that really did the job.
Bath is running well and green.
I love dehydrating my own herbs. I know where they came from. I know they're organic. And you save a lot of money because, let's face it, everything is going up in price. And it's just so simple.
Home with colored windows and our words have been more green. Hey,
I have really been enjoying making sauerkraut this summer. I love sauerkraut, and I started making my sauerkraut using mustard seed and garlic, and I've shared it with my neighbors, and one of them told me that she'd been making her own for years, but she'd never tasted anything as good as my sauerkraut, and that really made me feel good. So I not only gave her more, but I gave her my recipe. And it was just something I, came up with, just experimenting with flavors and tastes.
Eyes clicking in my ears. When did how's your voice so clear? It calls me out, says you're living.
If you've never made sauerkraut, do not be intimidated. It really is one of the easiest fermented foods to make. You could even just keep it super simple, a head of cabbage and some salt. I highly recommend Himalayan or Redmond salt. Some people use sea salt, but I usually just use the Himalayan or the Redmonds. Just as a side note, there is some missing footage here where I cover the bowl and set it aside. It's covered right now, and it's been like that for about 3 to 4 hours. I find that this makes the process of massaging the cabbage and producing brine so much easier. It just gives it a head start. Just as an FYI, this video was spliced, obviously, and so you're not going to see me massaging the cabbage for 10 minutes. But that's about the amount of time you need to get enough brine to cover the cabbage when you put it inside the jar. I use this fermentation kit that will push it down, put that cabbage down inside the brine, and then I let it sit for at least a week. I prefer a month, to be honest, but after about a week you will get a pretty decent taste. Now that my sourdough starter is bubbling and it was literally overflowing, it's time to make some bread. And today I thought I would make a really simple sourdough bread recipe from Jill Winger. This recipe calls for 1/2 cup of sourdough starter, 1 1/4 cup of lukewarm water. You mix those two together, and then you add 3 cups of bread flour, 1 1/2 teaspoon of salt. While I was filming this, I did forget to combine the starter and the water in the beginning steps, but it still turned out well. So here I'm just combining everything together in sort of a rough mixture. Don't overmix because it's supposed to be a no-knead style wet dough. Keep the rough dough in the bowl, cover it, and then you're going to let it sit for 30 minutes. After the resting time is complete, you're going to stretch and fold the dough a few times to form it into a ball. Now you're going to cover the dough with a clean dish towel again and let it rise in a warm place overnight or until it's doubled its size for about 8 hours. Once the dough has risen for about 8 hours, you're going to carefully remove it from the sides of the bowl, and I use this little spatula to do that. And then you're going to remove the dough from the bowl, and I usually put a little bit of flour so it doesn't stick to the counter, and you're going to fold it over a couple of times to tighten it into a nice little ball. and then you're going to let it sit for 15 minutes.
Never wanted nothing but your back of rose, black dress to keep yourself in line. You made the weather storms started fading out. I love your raven color, but you're soft enough.
After this resting period is complete, you're going to gently shape that dough into a ball once more and place it into a well-floured proofing basket or a bowl lined with a well-floured dish towel. Remember, don't add too much flour and do not knead the dough. And now you're going to cover it and let it rise for 2 to 3 hours or until doubled. Now you're going to tip the loaf out of the proofing basket onto a sheet of parchment. Now, this loaf of bread looks a little rough. I have to say, this was not my best loaf of bread. But I'm not an expert either, just FYI, I'm a beginner bread baker. Now place your bread with parchment paper inside a Dutch oven with a lid. Preheat your oven to 450. And once the oven is at 450, place the lid on the pot and bake it for 20 minutes. Then you're going to remove the lid and bake it for an additional 30 minutes or until the loaf is deeply browned and crispy on top. Then you're going to take it out of the oven and move it to a cooling rack and allow the loaf to cool completely before slicing it. Again, this is a very simple recipe. It's not going to be the lightest, airiest, fluffiest sourdough bread, but it tastes great, and it's very simple. And it was a great start to my bread baking adventure, which I'm still trying to perfect. I am definitely not an experienced bread baker by any means. Now that the sage and rosemary are fully dehydrated, I'm just removing them from their trays, and then I'm going to start removing the leaves from the stems, and then I will grind them down with a coffee grinder.
I don't know if I can swallow, if I taste anything. Afternoons with you felt too good to be blue. Almost washed my mind with the color of your eyes. Every jewel on earth didn't match your shining heart. Now it seems you gleam a brighter sheen. Oh, heaven must miss you. How lucky am I?
Today I thought I would try something different. I'm making a rosemary salt. So I just took some coarse Celtic sea salt, 1 cup of Celtic sea salt, and about 2 tablespoons of rosemary. And that concludes this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you liked it, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Have a wonderful day.